Hello, welcome to our channel. Click the subscribe button below if you want to see more content like this. Today we will talk about American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as a Milwaukee cannibal or Milwaukee monster, who dismembered his victims and stored them in the fridge. His murders involved necrophilia and cannibalism. He also sought to turn some of his victims into zombies in order to have absolute domination over them. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21, 1960. He was raised by a normal family. Jeffrey liked playing with dogs in the backyard of their house. His father, according to his memoirs, was always very affectionate towards animals. Lionel was a chemist, and when he was admitted to Iowa State University for a PhD in chemistry, the family moved there. While in Iowa, Jeffrey had a hernia operation at the age of 6. This surgery limited his movements, turning him into a more fragile, quiet child. In 1966, right after his father finished his PhD studies and got a job in Ohio, and the family moved again, Jeffrey started school in Ohio. At school he was quiet and shy. In 1967 the family moved to a new house. His mother was pregnant with a younger brother, David. Jeffrey was more welcoming to the new neighborhood. He made friends with a boy named Leaf from the house next door. He also liked going to school now. His favorite teacher at school was the science teacher. One day Jeffrey brought a jar of tadpoles from the stream to do an experiment in class. Later, when he learned that his teacher had given them to his friend Lee, he sneaked into the garage of the house next door and poured car oil into the jar, killing all the tadpoles. In the years that followed, he became more and more isolated. He did not allow anyone to intervene inside the walls he built around him. Between the ages of 10 and 15, he made friends again with a boy named William. William would later testify in court that Jeffrey would pick up dead animals he saw on the road, separate their bones and bury them in his private pet cemetery. Jeffrey's interest in the dead was beginning to be apparent, but he never killed an animal in his life. As he grew older, he became more and more isolated. He didn't talk anymore unless someone asked him something. He always had sexual fantasies in his head. Jeffrey was gay. He never had a girlfriend. In high school, his friends knew Jeffrey as a loner and a heavy drinker. Sometimes he even brought liquor to class. As early as high school, Jeffrey Dahmer began to fantasize about boys, but these fantasies were not about having sexual intercourse with them. He wanted to have absolute dominance over them. One of his high school friends, Jeffrey Dahmer, published a memoir in 2012 in which he collected his memories of Jeffrey. Jeffrey was obsessed with a jogger who passed by his house every day. He wanted to dominate him. In his head, he always imagined the jogger lying dead next to him, and he wanted to put it into action. For several months, he would wait behind a bush with a baseball bat to catch this man. But he was never able to do that. In 1978, Jeffrey committed his first murder. He gave a ride to a hitchhiker named Stephen Higgs and offered him a beer. Stephen accepted. When they got home together, they chatted and drank beer. When Stephen wanted to get up and leave, Jeffrey asked him to stay. Higgs insisted on leaving. Jeffrey got furious and hit him on the head with a small dumbbell he was using for a workout. He killed him on the spot. Now he had to dispose of the body before his family returned. Jeffrey began to dismember the body in the bathtub. It was his first experience, and he enjoyed it very much. After dismembering the body, he put it in garbage bags and buried in the garden of his house. Later he would exhume the body, dissolve it with acid, crush all the bones with a sledgehammer, and scatter them in the garden. In 1981, he was arrested for drunk driving and public disorderly conduct. His father decided it was best for Jeffrey to move away and live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. He had a quiet time here for a while, until he drank too much again and masturbated in front of 2 boys in 1986. He was arrested and spent a year on probation. Jeffrey committed his second murder in 1987. He had met a gay young man named Stephen Twomey in a gay bar. They had drinks and went to a hotel. At the hotel, he brutally murdered Twomey. In the morning, Jeffrey cold-bloodedly left the hotel and came back with a large suitcase. He stuffed the body in the suitcase and took it to his grandmother's house. In the basement of the house, he had sexual intercourse with the corpse. It was the first time Jeffrey had sex with a dead body. He then dismembered the body and disposed of it by throwing it in a garbage can far away. Jeffrey began to feel that he enjoyed killing. His third victim was a 14-year-old gay boy named Jamie Doc Stater. Jamie would occasionally hang out in gay bars to find someone he could have sex with for money. Jeffrey would offer his victims money in exchange of photographing them. He would bring his victims to his house, first drugging them. Then he strangled them to death. It was a routine for him to dismember them after killing his victims. He even photographed the whole process with a Polaroid camera. He also made a habit of hiding parts of his victims, either the head or a severed organ. He would then masturbate in front of these organs. One day he even took a skull with him to his workplace in his bag. In 1988, Richard Guerrero, of Mexican origin, suffered the same fate. He would meet his victims in a bar, take them home, kill them, sometimes have sex with the victim's dead body, and sometimes just masturbate. His grandmother was unaware of what was going on in her house, but she began to be disturbed by the constant visits by men, Jeffrey's drinking, and the strong odor coming from the basement. Jeffrey worked at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. In September 1988, he moved out of his grandmother's house and into his own apartment. As soon as he moved in, he got into trouble. He tricked a 13-year-old Laotian boy into taking pictures of him for $50. Interestingly, he didn't kill the boy but raped him. This Laotian boy was the older brother of Conrad Symphone, the man Jeffrey would kill in 1991. It was a strange coincidence. When the Laotian boy's family found out about the attack, they filed a criminal complaint against Jeffrey. After police questioning, Jeffrey appeared in court and pleaded guilty to abuse in January 1988. The trial was adjourned to a later date to determine the sentence. In the meantime, Jeffrey awaited the verdict at his grandmother's house, but he had no intention of sitting idle. At another gay bar, Jeffrey met a young man named Anthony Sears. Anthony was a model, so he readily agreed to Jeffrey's request to have his pictures taken in exchange of money. Anthony was trapped and began to take his last breath of life. Jeffrey did the same things to Anthony. Only this time, he would first boil Anthony's head for a long time in order to hide it. When it was easy to separate the meat from the bone, he separated it and added the skull to his collection. He painted the skull gray in an attempt to make it look like a plastic model, like the ones used by medical students. When the verdict was heard, Jeffrey's brilliant acting saved him, despite the prosecutor's insistence that he be arrested. He was offered psychological treatment at a clinic. This was a reward for Jeffrey. His sentence was suspended for 5 years. For a year, he would go to work during the day and stay in a detention center at night. After 10 months, the judge granted him early release in view of his good behavior. His father had sent a private letter to the judge asking him not to release him until he had recovered, but now Jeffrey was free. After his release in 1990, he moved into apartment 213 on North 23rd Street, where he would commit his worst murders. In this apartment, he killed 12 people in 1 year. He was especially rampant between May and July of 1991. He killed 6 people. Jeffrey also confessed that he liked to eat the flesh of his victims. He believed that in this way his victims would be reborn. When he ate human flesh, he was aroused by it. This was evidenced by the abundance of human flesh in his freezer when he was caught. Jeffrey Dahmer had also begun to perform lobotomies on his victims. He would drill into the heads of his victims, whom he had drugged with an overdose of drugs, and inject chemical fluid into them. He was trying to turn his victims into zombies. Of course, they all died on the spot. Only one survived for a few days with minimal life functions. Jeffrey described this very coldly in an interview after his capture. The police saw a black man in his 30s running around in handcuffs. At first they thought he was an outlaw. Tracy Edwards told them about a strange man who handcuffed him. This strange man was Jeffrey Dahmer himself. The police went with Tracy Edwards to Jeffrey's house. Edwards told them that the knife with which Jeffrey had threatened him was in his bedroom. Jeffrey was so calm that he even gave the police directions to the key to unlock the handcuffs. The policeman was shocked to see the venue. There were dozens of photographs of dead bodies on the bedroom floor. Dead bodies, skulls, body parts were scattered around. He called out to his friend to arrest Jeffrey. Jeffrey tried to resist, but now he was caught. The first journalist who entered the house after Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest wrote that there was a metal container behind the cupboard with body parts. There were 2 skulls on a big pot on the shelf. Also in the wardrobe are bottles of ethyl alcohol, chloroform, and formaldehyde. Some drawers had Polaroid photographs Jeffrey had taken of his victims at various stages of their deaths. One photo showed the head of a man freshly decapitated in a sink. Another picture depicted a victim's throat opened from the throat to the groin, just like the animals that butchers cut open to clean them. On July 13, 1992, Jeffrey went on trial and pleaded guilty. He said he had committed the murders out of insanity. The prosecutor argued that it was not madness but sheer psychopathy. A rigorous jury selection was made. Jurors with a biased view of homosexuals were eliminated, but 13 of the 14 jurors were white. Most of his victims were black, so the relatives of the victims protested. Jeffrey's lawyer was trying to convince the judge that Jeffrey was crazy, as it was obvious that no sane person could have done what he did. The prosecutor presented his own indictment. When 2 police detectives began to read out the 160-page confession, the courtroom was silent. The lines read were a panorama of atrocity. When Dahmer was given the floor, he said, "It is hard to believe that any human being could have done what I did, but I know that I did it." Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 life sentences and was sent to Columbia Prison to serve his sentence. At first he was in solitary confinement. Later he was transferred to less secure unit based on his good behavior. He joined a 3-man cleaning crew. One of them was Jesse Anderson, a dangerous white man who had brutally murdered his wife and framed a black man for the crime. The other was a black man named Christopher Scarver, who thought he was the Son of God. Most of Jeffrey's victims were black. It's not hard to imagine how Scarver viewed Jeffrey. On the morning of November 28, 1994, when the guards came to pick up the cleanup crew, they saw Jesse Anderson lying on the floor heavily wounded and Jeffrey Dahmer lying dead on the floor with his head smashed. When they looked around, Christopher Scarver had a metal bar and blood in his hand.